Thoughts, understood as what is thought, may be called objective. This seems to be a contradiction, since thinking thought is subjective. But the terms subjective and objective are used in very different ways. When I say that thinking is subjective in the positive sense, I mean by thinking my freedom, my universality. But we also say negatively that something is only subjective, such as an opinion, an assurance, where one means peculiarity by subjectivity. Pure subjectivity is the I. Let's see what the note says. Das Ich will be translated as the I, not as the ego. I agree with that translation, that's good. Pure subjectivity is the I, this single one in its pure universality. On the one hand, thoughts are subjective, but objective only insofar as I, as subject, have hold of them as objects. What happened? On the other hand, objective thought occurs where the content of the thought is the very matter at hand itself. It means that this matter is objective on its own account. This matter is also what matters to me. This objectivity is invoked spiritually as well as non-spiritually, since what is spiritual has in appearance something unessential about it, which conceals the matter at hand, which I must come to know. Logic, it can now be seen, coincides with metaphysics. However, the matter at hand is chiefly thoughts, but one understands by logic thinking only insofar as it is subjective form, while by metaphysics one understands an applied thinking, a thinking which extends over the objects held in representation. Metaphysics thinkingly contemplates God, the soul, rational psychology, and the world, cosmology. It is therefore a thinking of objects. We may indeed call it applied logic, though it is very different from the applied logic of the usual textbooks. The distinction between thinking and its objects fall by the wayside, for we now have objective thoughts, i.e., thoughts which themselves are the matter at hand. One thinks the matter, one does not think about it. But we are rather lodged within it, in the matter itself. Objective thoughts are thoughts which constitute the content itself. They are what is substantial. Logic is thus content, and with that it coincides with metaphysics. Among the forms of logic, the self-concept, judgment, and syllogism, Schluss, are likewise apprehended. It seems that these forms belong to the conscious mind, and in one respect that is right. For one says, I form for myself a concept of some matter. The same thing that I have in my consciousness of the matter truly belongs to that matter itself. It is its substance. This implies that the self-concept has a certain content, but that this content is also to be the content of the matter itself. The predicates that arise in judgment are not added to the matter. Rather, the matter at hand has these predicative determinations upon itself. In judgment, I distinguish between subject and predicate. And this division is something subjective. It is subjective form. But this division occurs in the judgment of finite things. The object has the property, but is also separable from that property. Things are thus their own judgment in the realm of the finite, for their properties are separable from them. Anaxagoras was the first to say that nous rules the world. Not personal thinking, but rather the activation, the universal, determinate development towards ends realizing its goals. If one says God by his wisdom rules the world, God is thereby in the world, not outside it. We will see that things themselves are concepts, judgments and syllogism. These are forms of nous, of universality. The animal is something universal, but without realizing it, it is universal only for the human mind. The laws of spirit are universal essentialities, and the essentialities of what itself is objective. The entire interest of philosophy revolves around the fact that I have a concept of this object because I know what is universal in it, which is what is abiding. Individual animals die off. The universal species remains. To be sure, the universal is present in what appears to the senses as something singular, but the species present in the individual remains and preserves itself despite the death of the individual. When we say there is an object present, the very matter itself, it is we who speak who are the subject. The opposition established here between subject and object is of the greatest interest to philosophy. Contained within this opposition is the determination of truth. Yet we must distinguish philosophical truth from ordinary truth. Ordinary truth lies in the fact that our subjective representations agree with an object. That representation has the same content as the object. In representation, the content of the object becomes more general than it is in the object itself, but the essential content nonetheless remains. Our representation ought to correspond to the content, and that is truth in the ordinary sense. In other words, truth is something I possess in my subjective representations. The question as to whether the objects themselves have truth, which is truly philosophical interest, does not even arise. If we express ourselves more precisely, all we can say is that the representations are correct, not the objects themselves. The rule by which the representation is judged, in theoretical judgment, is the object with which it agrees or does not agree. The object lays down the law to which pliable thinking in its representation adapts. But in practical life, we have an unbending aim, one obligation, Sonnen, one plan. When we build a house, it is we who establish the rule, i.e., the blueprint by which matters are measured. Things are not themselves the rule, but rather must conform to our chosen representations. Matters are correct when we make them adapt to our chosen rule, our representation. At the same time, as we pursue diverse interests like house building, as human beings, we ought to regulate our practice by the moral law. The doings and strivings of human beings do not lay down this law, and so in morality, matters are quite the contrary of what occurs in the pursuit of such diverse interests. Here, an ambivalence enters. The moral law must be true in itself, and our practice must correspond to it. We can thus say of an action, morally speaking, that it conforms to its aim, which is what makes it a true action. And so we effect a transfer of truth over from our subjective representations, for example, in choosing to build a house, to what is objective, and rightly so, since whatever is objective in our action ought to correspond to the moral law. We have, to the one side, our own objectivity, our own immediate being with its impulses, and it is by subjecting them to moral education that we are to become what we ought to be. Off to the other side, there is another objectivity, the moral law which relates itself to the objectivity of our impulses. We now generally have hold of something objective, that is, impulse, and something subjective, that is, thought, by the ordinary concept of truth. The external object provides the rule in theoretical pursuits, while what is mental, das Geistige, lays down the rule in practical pursuits. Truth, in this higher sense, also has two sides. One, the truth in this second higher sense also has two sides. One, the one hand, what is objectively real, and on the other hand, its self-concept as such. In the case of truth in the ordinary sense, the only question is whether we have hold of it. In the case of higher truth, the, the other to which the house or my action is to conform is itself concept. And the question is whether the objective reality conforms with its self concept, whether it is what it should be. Truth occurs when a real concept, whether an external object or an action, conforms to its self concept. What is bad is then something untrue, since it is opposed to the concept of what it ought to be. An action which fails to conform to its purpose is a bad action and fails to be a true action. Where before, in the truth of something real, the thought was objective under the determination of being the self concept. The ideal occurs where the thought and nothing but the thought is realized. What is ugly is only an accident of one or another sort, as when the self-concept of human being does not alone pervade a human being, but exists alongside illness, grief, passion, and so on. In whatever is beautiful, reality completely determines itself, beginning from within and then moving outward. That's crazy. We shall come to know such higher truth more closely in the idea, where the self-concept is at once reality. What is true is the idea. In the idea, there are two determinations, thought and reality, thought and the object or being. Abstractly viewed, we have an opposition of thinking and being, and the idea is the unity of the two. Thus, there are thus two sides, and the only question is the relation between the two. It is a question of their unity, of the kind of unity that is found here. That is the greatest, that's the great question of philosophy, which has principally occupied the interest of our age. If thought determinations are finite, they are untrue. Truth generally is whatever is infinite. Truth is found wherever reality corresponds to the self-concept. Thus, the self-concept has hold in reality of nothing beyond what is its very own. That the two are other to each other is a mere show. The self-concept intuits itself in reality. It is for itself in what is real. It is other than itself, but it is at once one and the same as itself in the other. Bars. I have a plan for a house as soon as I record whatever I wish to do. But this plan is fully contained only in the house itself by which the plan is carried out. Again, bars. Infinity lies in such a correspondence between the plan and its execution. The self-concept in this correspondence lies beyond itself. It is no longer merely for itself, but finds itself within another in diverse appearances. And yet, even in this beyond, the self-concept is at home with itself and thus has returned within itself. If I relate myself to something other than myself, I am finite. My sight comes to an end in the object seen, and in visual sight I thus comport myself as a finite being. But in thinking I comport myself as an infinite being, since I remain throughout by myself in my object. If what is real corresponds to its object, it is infinite, and that is affirmative infinity. Insofar as thought determinations are finite, they do not conform to truth, which is infinite. The plain relation of what is real to its self-concept is either finite or infinite. If what is real is other than its self-concept, the relation is finite, and the determination of thought by which we apprehend what is real is itself only finite. But this finitude of thought determinations may be taken in two ways. By the first way, they are, as thought determinations, something merely subjective, and in their object they meet with their end, which makes them finite, which stands over against them as negation of them. By the second way, finitude, instead of being an external limitation on the thought determination, enters into the thought determination itself. Thought determinations bear finitude upon themselves when one such determination finds its limit, Grenze, in another thought determination rather than in its object. The content of a thought determination can have its limit in another thought determination, much as a cause has its limit in the effect, much as the volume of space has a limit in an adjacent volume. We have then thinking and being, the self-concept and the object. We have said that truth lies in what is objective, which gives us both the self-concept and the object. A higher matter for our consideration than the object as distinguished from the thinking of it is the relationship of thinking to its object. In considering how we think, we note that we first think in a totally naive manner. Thinking is present in all my representations because I am myself present in them. We then naively assume that by thinking we learn what the truth of a matter is. The first mode of philosophizing was this naive mode. The truth of the matter came to be taken up in thought quite immediately, without distinguishing our thinking of it. The presupposition was simply that we arrive at the truth by thinking. In this first mode of philosophizing, the opposition between thinking and objectivity has not been thought. Such was the path followed by ancient philosophy. The ancients did not make explicit that thinking is different from the matter itself, from the object thought. According to the second opposition, or mode of philosophizing, thinking and the object are considered to be different, so that we simply fail to reach the object through thinking. Rather, we at once take up the object quite as it is in itself without thinking it. If it is said that the subject must conform to the object, the mode of philosophizing is empiricism. But if it is said with Kant that thinking is a development of forms internal to thinking itself, while the object itself remains external to the forms without the forms conforming to them, quite another separation occurs between thinking and the object. The third mode of philosophizing is a return to the first path of the ancients, but now with a reflective consciousness of our own thinking, and of the alleged fact that thinking in general, the subject is immediately connected with its object. The subject does not exist without immediate knowledge of the object. The subject, and it is only by thus knowing the object that consciousness attains to truth. But according to this immediate knowledge in Jacobi, both determinations, the subject with its immediate object, are limited to a single object, to God. In immediate knowledge, thinking and God are, as the object thought, are inseparable. These positions of thought we must now go through one by one. What holds interest in our present time revolves around these relationships. So let's stop right there. And that was the general preliminary concept on the lectures of logic.
Very nice.
Any thoughts?
Let's see. I guess we began very beginning with the origin of logic, and then we moved on into, I guess, the distinction between the particular and the universal. And then I guess I'm probably skipping a couple, but we end with the separation of thought and being, and the idea that unites the two, and how philosophy has had three events. One, the first event with the ancient. The second event is literally Kant, and then after that we get Hegel, post Kant.
Yeah, well, Jacobi, you would say he's a post-Kantian.
I don't know enough about Jacobi. Sorry.
It's yeah, no worries. I think yeah, for me what came up in those it's the three positions of thinking towards its object. The ancients, it makes a lot of sense, like they just didn't think that thinking actually is mediating the very object that it's thinking about. They just think, oh, if we literally just think the object through on its own accord, we are thinking the object through on its own accord in this naive way. So like then we get for me, like Hume was in that picture, empiricism, you know, that's where the separation is, that hey, like, yeah, you're thinking, but are you really thinking the object? And like that's a cut right there, right? That's a cut that Kant is also working from, because I believe,
Well,
and tell me if I'm
yeah.
wrong, but I believe Spinoza and Leibniz on the rationalist side of things still have this naivete of the ancient world, whereas Hume breaks with this. Or like the naivete. Well, like I think
It's
perhaps like
complicated, so
it is
yeah.
complicated, because Bard is making the point in his paper that what Leibniz is doing is bringing like relativism to the forefront, whereas like Spinoza kind of like pins down his own God,
So it's a
but
thinker of
presents his,
unity, and Leibniz is a thinker of plurality. So
yeah, of
Leibniz
multiplicity and
of multiplicity, exactly. So what?
decentralization.
Right, exactly. What got preserved from the ancient, I claim, with people like Spinoza or Leibniz, is more like the idea that there is a one that is detached from what we have here, which is not a one, right? This is particular. This is less real than the one, let's say. So there are two objects, the objects of thought, right? In Spinoza, there is res extensa and res, the other one. There's the thought and extension. And as well as in ancient philosophy, right? You have forms, right? The world of forms, and then the world of like appearance or shadow or something like that. That's the less real one. And then the Kantian event would be like, and I think Hegel mentions it in this lecture, it would be like acknowledging the impossibility to get to one from the other. That's the Kantian event, is the bringing into the picture the horizon of it. And the Hegelian event would be obviously the collapsing of such a thing altogether.
So you do think that the because he didn't
So hold on,
in
let me find it.
the third mode of philosophizing
Yeah.
is a return to the first.
It's a recapitulation of the first through the other. Like it acknowledges that it's kind of a combined view, because now you have the two objects as well as the horizon of how to, like now you get pure appearance. So something like I'm having a hard time uh thinking about it. Okay, something like the external world is immediate, right? It's just it. But then so is your identity. Is to understand that one exists with the other. And the appearance of what that's it, that's the existence of it. So if you want to, let's say, prove the external world, it's just is, right? Because there is an interior world. The external world cannot exist on its own. It doesn't
Yeah,
make any
the object.
sense. Right. It doesn't make any sense without the interior, the interiority that is co-instantiated, as I put it in my paper. Let me, you guys talk. Let me find this specific passage, because there's a couple of
Yeah,
things.
Koen, what
Are
comes
you
up in?
looking for the part on the third mode of philosophizing, that one, Jason?
Yeah.
Yeah. That one is on
Page
I'm
19.
also, yeah,
35.
perfect. I'm also looking for this passage where he goes, the verification is the self-concept. So that's the difference.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
Yeah.
And also the self-concept as finitude and infinity simultaneously.
Right.
It was getting quite psychedelic there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna
yeah, absolutely. And I would like to develop this further. And this is a thinker, honestly. the way he described finitude is to do with two things: limit, right, the limit of an object, and the separability of a thing and its properties, which is precisely limit, right? So let's say this is a finite object because I can separate the shape of it and the color of it, right? The weight of it. These are all things that the limits present themselves to me. So therefore, this is a finite. So it's interesting. In a way, he's saying that finite objects are like manifold, basically. These are finite. The infinite object is actually just the one object where the property and the thing is one. You cannot collect. Yeah. What do you think of that?
Yeah, there's also another way to think of it, because you have an apple, for example, and then you say the apple is the apple, but then you eat the apple and then there's no apple. So then, like, if you would write that down, then like it's like he gives this example in the phenomenology of spirit, right?
Yes, yeah, I
You
know.
say now
I
is
get
night.
yeah, yeah,
It has to
exactly.
stay true because it's written down. I don't know why he says that.
No,
Like the reasoning there is kind of weird, but anyway, it's like if the apple is not the apple anymore,
Mhm.
so that's why it's finite. But thinking is infinite, and that's
right,
like,
because
yeah,
thinking, you cannot, it just appears as thinking, right? There is no, the property of thinking is still thinking. The object of thinking is thought. There is this one dimension, there is this oneness to think that is irreducible, as opposed to, let's say, he does this in the phenomenology where he uses the example of a salt, right? You get the tart flavor, you get the cube form, something like that. So the salt is many things. So it's a manifold, but thinking is one. But it's infinite, right? It's interesting. So maybe this is where the
Well,
finite, yeah.
I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, yeah, thinking as the activation of the universal, or thinking as an activity
Mhm.
versus the content of thought, versus a thought, which is a limited form of the activity of thinking.
Oh, right.
Finds
Yeah.
its own determination, of course.
but
Gains its identity from its internal contradiction.
but right now a paradox emerges because our object of thought is thinking.
Right. So that's the thinking itself can be an object. That's it's.
I mean, that's sort of the move he's pointing
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
That's what separates the
third philosophy.
Hegelian third mode versus
right.
the naive ancient mode, is that now we've, it's not just the correspondence of thinking to its object, but rather thinking has become another one of the objects, and so we have this strange relationship between the activity of thinking and thinking itself as the object, where the thing has become the content of itself.
Yeah, and that's metaphysics, right? He literally said metaphysics is applied thinking. These one-liners are awesome, by the way. Like, it's so difficult.
How do you think, if he were to differentiate
Yeah.
between metaphysics and logic, because he was playing with that, and I was like a little bit like, what's the difference?
So the way I read that entire passage, and it's interesting. So logic, and this is my interpretation, feel free to attack it. Logic is thinking as subjective form. So you have a you have a problem, let's say, and you're trying to think it logically. The content of it is subjective. The content of it is a thing out there, is a problem.
It's objective.
It's subjective. It means that it's from your perspective.
It's
basically like an opinion you have, right? That's but here here's an example from my life. I had a conversation several days ago with my wife about, I forgot what, but for some reason the conversation ended up talking about like logic, right? Like math, like those boring those boring syllogisms you learn. And what's interesting was that she was doing what's called the property of, I forgot this technical jargon. Anyway, the point is that we can do logic without knowing it. Therefore, I think that's subjective. So when you try to think of math, for instance, 1 + 1 = 2, it feels right. When math is wrong, it doesn't feel right? There's something off. So therefore it's subjective. So the difference between that and metaphysics is metaphysics being applied thinking. The content of it would be logic itself. But the content of it would be this: how did I solve that problem earlier? With what mechanism did I solve the problem? So Aristotle would say something like a syllogism. How, what's the algorithm I used to solve this problem? Let's say, because logic is kind of like algorithm. What do you think?
Yeah.
Go
I'm
ahead.
not entirely sure. He's how I was originally reading. I'm trying to pull up the exact quote because what's sticking in my head is logic as like the form that thinking takes, and then metaphysics as applying that to questions of God, of ultimate existence, of so it is a movement away from like the study of logic is a little bit more of the consideration of thinking as a formal process itself and trying to identify that, the shape of that, and then applying that to the sort of ontological questions that we ask ourselves would be more metaphysics. But I could be totally wrong. I'm not sure.
No, I think
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that's in line with what you're saying.
I think, yeah, no, it kind of does. Yeah. I guess to put it very simply, I would say when the content of it involves logic, when the content itself is logic, then thinking coincides with metaphysics. So, when logic, let's say I'm thinking about something like God, right? And then in there, if you ever taken a philosophy of God class or something like that, right? There's like, oh, the attributes of God. God must be free. And then you apply logic, right, to see, oh, how could a thing be free? And that's metaphysics. So yes, maybe that's my.
What do you
There's
think?
a triad here. I forgot where it is. Logic is thus content. Yeah, well, I'll read this actually. One thinks the matter, one does not think about it. We're in it, but we rather are lodged within it, in the matter itself. Objective thoughts are thoughts. Yeah, I think this distinguish between subjective thoughts and objective thoughts. It's very interesting. Objective thoughts are thoughts which constitute the content itself. They are what is substantial. Logic is thus content, and with that, it coincides with metaphysics. There's also here metaphysics thinkingly contemplates God. Now, this is already interesting. It thinkingly contemplates God. Like, why don't say metaphysics thinks God? Why thinkingly contemplates
Thinkingly
God?
is great. Yeah.
I would be interested to see what is the German translation, because I can think of words, but I'm not sure. Metaphysics thinkingly contemplates God, the soul, and the world. So that's a triad. The triad of metaphysics is God, the soul, and the world. We can maybe modernize it in a way and speculate on what that exactly means. Like, what is the soul? He says rational psychology. Maybe it would be like the subject, the Freudian subject of desire or something.
Yeah. What page is that one?
This is page 15 on the paper. It's 41.
Yeah.
On the, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder. I think the way maybe this is not exactly modern way of putting it. It's definitely the self, and
the and nature, right? The external world. That's the world. And maybe God here is like the big other. Verifications, you know, logic, stuff like that, like rightness. How do things become correct? Something like that. That would be. I think there's also a triad, right? Nature,
Spirit,
spirit, and what's the third thing?
logic.
Logic, right?
Yeah, nature as pathos, logic as logos, spirit as mythos. Well, I wonder what like God, the soul, and the world would be here. The world
So
would be.
which one is God?
I think God is logos. Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
We're philosophizing. We're philosophers, so it has to be logos.
Right.
I think there's this. Like my question in the IDW: Does Hegel have a sex life? Because he says thinking is higher than space and time, and that could also respond that yeah, but thinking derives these concepts, so they're derived from thinking. It's kind of like it's the same with Hegel, like the moment you're trying to get out of
Well, I
it,
think,
you just
yeah.
meet it again, and he's like waving at you, and you're like, oh, he was already there, and I trying to get there.
Yeah, and I think maybe in this case, space and time, like the way Cadell approached that was looking at space and time as a certain sort of concepts that structure our thinking in certain ways and that historically emerge, which might be different than saying thinking is above the body or thinking is above set or something like that, or like might be.
Yeah.
Although I feel like Hegel would probably say that as well, like maybe it's not space-time here isn't directly referring to the pathic, although maybe it is, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it has to. I think there's this thing that, for example, with narratives and the history as a necessity, the reason that history is a necessity is because it's all a narrative. Like in German, it becomes more explicit with the word Geschichte schreiben. So it's like you are within history, and that means that you can't judge it neutrally and objective from above it. And with thinking, it's the same. So you can't get out of thinking, and like you have to see thinking as the culmination of concepts, maybe in a sense. Well, it's like a
The
weird
the
ass circular
activation.
reasoning.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
activation of the concepts.
Because how you like if history is not necessary, then actually you're deceiving yourself in some way. Of course, you can change history by like through events you rewrite history, and it's retroactively like you, for example, you can like in my life, I used to be a communist and I had certain ideas about the development of human history, and then I read other books and I'm like, oh no, I disagree with the communist narrative now. So there's events that happen in the future that will change the narrative that you have of history, but still it's necessary, no matter how you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm actually trying to get at like thinking as above space and time, like how to think that, because how would you isn't the what Hegel critiques in the preface of the Phenomenology of Spirit, like the intuitive absolute, this attempt at negating this thinking is higher than space and time? Like you fall back into some kind of pathic immediacy that, like whatever, in full ecstasy is like, oh, this is the absolute, and when it's gone, it's like, oh, it's not. Then it just falls away. Where this is not the absolute because it's a very fragile finitude.
Yeah, I mean, Hegel definitely, I think I don't think it's not embodied, definitely. Like, I think that's the problem with that's kind of the implication, right? What if Hegel is actually not as cool as I thought he was, And yeah. But I think he wants imageless thinking, right? So whatever feeling of like awe or something, like he's not a romantic in this regard whatsoever, Whatever gives you feeling of anything, it's kind of false, like it's just thinking, right? You want to think clearly regarding like your story, right? How you move to the future from the past and so on. You know what Zizek said about the uh 10 years ago there was this Wall Street rally. What do you call it again? The Occupy Wall Street.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then he
Ridiculous.
asked, yeah, and then he asked the people there, do you have any solution? Do you have any answers? But then, so nobody has any answers, right? Nobody has any plan. So then his analysis is very interesting, I think, and I think it's Hegelian. Just maybe it's not the time to act. Maybe it's the time to actually just seriously think about it. Just think about it before doing it. And I think this is interesting in your experience as well, right? Because you grew out of your past just by thinking about your very condition. So maybe thinking is, I think the important thing here is to think. And that's why it's above. Yeah, just think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how this might connect, because I was curious about this concept of affirmative infinity that he talks about on 18, or it's in the PDF, it's page 44. And he talks about kind of finite determinate being, which I would say might be in this case related to space and time, as one form of thought, versus this kind of infinite form of thought in which thinking is relating to itself. And so thinking is its own self-concept, right? So there's this weird like loop and communion with itself. And it seems like he's pointing to this process and this moment as a kind of infinity, that it might be behind, as a kind of pure thought, or an infinity that might total infinite self-relation that might be beyond space-time. Because in this sense, it's no longer taking any kind of external object as its limiting form. So it's sort of a shapeless thinking in some ways, or it's like this pure activation that that hasn't taken a particular determinate shape. And so in this way is a strange infinite self-relation. But I don't like how I mean, I don't, to me there's ways in which I can relate to certain moments in my life in which the phenomenology felt like a kind of infinity. But I don't, but besides that experiential correlate to something like affirmative infinity, I don't know if it's something you can stay with. I don't know.
If what is real corresponds to its concept, it is infinite, and that is affirmative infinity. Insofar as thought determinations are finite, they do not conform to truth, which is infinite. Truth is infinite. And if what is real corresponds to its concept, it is infinite. Which means that the apple isn't affirmative infinity. It's not, its concept doesn't correspond to its real through mediation of time. But so it doesn't conform to this higher truth that Hegel was getting at. Also, this distinction is very interesting. I think it's pedagogical, like the way he's going about this. Like, oh, you have ordinary truth and then philosophical truth. I wonder how much of this we'll actually see in the science of logic itself, or that he will just work this out more thoroughly, because this really seems like has been done for an audience, like an audience which doesn't have really knowledge about this. But I think what you said, this is the ordinary truth, which is not philosophical, just has a certain representation, and then I want to conform whatever is given to me to that representation. So you want to build a program that does certain things on the computer. You have to think that out. You're trying to build it. It doesn't work. You make mistakes. Eventually, through all the failures, you come there and you build it.
Yeah,
But
it's
that's
a
ordinary
very
truth.
right.
And then you force the object into your representation.
Yeah, yeah, and at best you have like probability, right? Like the probability. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The rationalists love doing this move. I think this passage is very interesting. This entire paragraph is fascinating. So he starts there by I'm just trying to break it down because I don't think I have an understanding of this fully as well. So you start with a plan. Let's say you have a plan for a house, and this is concretized if you record it. Let's say I tell you I want to build a house, but the plan, right, for this house is only fully realized when the house is carried out into a house. So once the house is built, you can see the house and see, that's the purpose of that. That's the planning of that. And you see the division of the room. So the plan corresponds to the objects, and that's that I think that's what it means by affirmative infinity there, because you're relating the object is being related to something beyond itself, which is the plan, which is in here, right? What do you think?
You would say that's affirmative infinity. I think something like the idea, that's affirmative infinity, or the
Yeah,
concept, the
no, no,
self-concept, like not the plan for the house, because the house,
no, but that's a
Jason, the
self
house,
concept.
you
That's
think
a
so?
self.
But the house will, when you have a tsunami, the house is dead. Then there's no house.
Okay, but the house is not the essential part here. The essential part is that the plan you can see by looking at the house, which is a
And
self.
so you're saying that this plan is a
Mhm.
self-concept.
Yes. So when the object can be linked beyond itself to a plan, it makes it that's no longer a finite object. That becomes an infinite object, because when you relate to something finite, say I'm relating to my own body, which is an object, right, which is a finite object, I become finite. But when I think in myself, I act like an infinite object. I can do whatever I want. I can think whatever I want. So when thinking relates to itself, it is infinite. But when thinking relates to a finite object, then you become a finite thing yourself, right? You see, it's finite thinking. Let's say blah blah blah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know if this holds up what you said. I think
Okay.
yeah,
I'm uh,
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure how to think this as well. Like,
yeah. Right.
where do the distinctions lie? But
So it says here. I'm just gonna read it. If what is real correspond to its concept, it is infinite, right? And that is affirmative infinity. So when
but this
yeah,
is the same thing he gets at in the introduction of the phenomenology of
right.
spirit, and he says, okay, like let's go to the moment where notion and object will correspond. Of course, they correspond in the absolute. That's absolute knowing,
Mm-hmm.
as this taken up, like it's an infinite finitude, something like that. I would say,
Yeah.
that's the self-concept, because it does, maybe it's comparable to life. Life makes distinctions and then overcomes them.
The way I understand self concept is literally just the determinate negation. That's how you get to a self-concept.
Right.
So let's say again to go back to the. I'm just trying to unless I'm.
But you know,
I'm not understanding
notion
this
and
paragraph.
I think
Yeah.
notion and self-concept, they are the same.
Yes. Yes.
Because
Yeah.
they Hegel uses both words begriff.
Right.
They are the same
Right.
thing.
Right.
That might be a bit confusing.
Yeah.
So Jason, what do you think is beautiful?
Yeah.
Because Hegel says, in whatever is beautiful, reality completely determines itself, beginning from within and then moving outward.
Wait, which page is that?
That is page 17. It's 43
Yeah, yeah. I love that one. Hold on.
at the end.
Here we go. Yeah, I see.
The ideal occurs where the thought and nothing, but the thought is realized. What is ugly is only an accident of one or another sort, as when the self-concept of being human does not alone pervade a human being, but exist alongside illness, grief, passion, and so on. In whatever is beautiful, reality completely determines itself, beginning from within and then moving outward.
Yeah.
Why
I think
is
yeah.
illness, grief, passion? Why is that ugly?
So I think he's
What's
here. He's not talking about he's not giving him his he's not giving you his thoughts about like what's ugly and beautiful. I think here he actually is saying something like the aesthetic of thinking. So when let's say you want to come up with a theory, right? And the theory is like ugly. Why is the theory ugly? Well, it's entangled with all this other shit, like the idea is entangled with, whoops, I lost my page.
Would you
Along
say
yeah.
it?
But when it's beautiful, it's consistent. Reality, yeah, determines itself from within.
It seems like
Yeah.
it's ugly if it's within the realm of the understanding where you're just distinguishing properties of an object,
Yes.
like the
Yeah.
human is illness, grief, passion. Whereas if you go to the simplicity of a self-concept, which determines itself beginning from within and then moving outward, maybe that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Or that is that or yeah, or is that wrong? I don't know. I'm just speculating,
Yeah.
whatever.
No, yeah. But he also says here, what is ugly is only an accident of some sort. So it's like it's your theory. That I still read it as theory making when you want to make. But I think he's saying both approaches fall short, because you're just feeling it. You're just feeling like your theory is. You're just eyeballing your theory basically based on aesthetics.
Right. So
Uh,
he's actually, you're saying that
the
he's critiquing aesthetic thinking.
Yes, I think this passage is a thing. It's a critique of the ways we come up with things in life, come up with judgments in life. And when we judge something to be ugly, the concept is tied with all this other stuff. But when we judge something to be beautiful, it determines itself, it's consistent. But they both kind of miss the point, I think. That's how I'm reading this paragraph. What do you guys think? I'm wildly wrong here, probably. This is it.
Honestly, I have
I
no
gotta
idea.
say, it's
I did
difficult.
not know what to make of this paragraph. Um,
Let's go through it slowly, maybe. Let's see. The ideal occurs where the thought and nothing but the thought is realized.
So okay, so let's stop. What is that?
Yeah.
The ideal occurs where the thought and nothing but the thought is realized.
I mean,
Because
I
this,
read that as the notion.
Oh, so here
Yes.
there are three things. We miss the ideal. You see, there's the ideal, the ugly, the beautiful.
Yeah.
And
Right. I mean, the ugly and the
yeah.
beautiful feels like in the phenomenology it would fall in maybe the chapter on spirit, as
So
some.
hold on. So I guess the ideal. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, dude, go for it.
That was so rude.
No, cut me off,
Um,
man. Cut me off.
uh, the ideal occurs. So this is where
Mhm.
ideal thinking is when thinking is the object of thinking itself. You know, when we're doing metaphysics, when we're doing when
That's how I was reading it.
yeah, and after that it's just judgments. After that it's basically aesthetic judgment.
Yeah, that was my initial take on it,
Yeah.
but
That's it.
I
but
think so. What do you
but
think?
then there's something in whatever is beautiful, reality completely determines itself, beginning within and then moving outward. Does seem to be that
Yeah, what does that
there's
mean?
like thinking
Yeah, what
could
the
be
fuck?
beautiful. Thinking could be beautiful if it align, you know, it needs to reach a standpoint of absolute knowing in which there is this experience of infinite self-relation, or the realization of the notion. And then from that standpoint, you know, if determinate theories, action and creation comes from some sort of connection from that place, then maybe that expression is that determinate expression could be considered beautiful. That wasn't, maybe that's another way to read that.
Yeah.
It doesn't lose touch with that infinite self-relation.
Yeah.
The simple self-reference.
Yeah. And I mean, then there's, I don't know. What is ugly is only an accident of one sort or another.
Right. So here, as
I mean,
in the
yeah.
self-concept of being human. So let's say if you want to come up with a self-concept of being human, does so if your self-concept of being human doesn't just include a human being, but instead is entangled with illness, grief, passion, and so on. So I guess that's like inelegant thinking. Like you can, I don't know. I'm still hung up with my
Yeah, no,
interpretation.
that's what I was getting at.
Right,
You're in the realm of the understanding, and you're just
right,
attaching properties to an object, but you're not thinking the object on its own accord. And
right.
that's like, I don't know. My reading is that the ideal is beautiful, and that it is, that reality completely determines itself, beginning from within and then moving outward. I'm not sure what this within and outwardness would then entail, but I think it seems to be linked, the realization of thought and nothing but thought, and realization of the self-determination of reality moving inward and then outward.
So maybe the beautiful is a lack of a dialectical relationship between the inner and the outer, because it starts just, it's a pure being that starts from within, and then everything else is its
Okay.
influence. It like the Platonic realm of the universals, like that's how I think of it. Like that's the true thing, and then everything else is like a lesser emanation of that. I think
Okay,
that's
like a symmetrical kind of.
right, like a symmetrical relationship between the inner and the outer,
Yeah, okay.
as
Damn,
opposed
that's interesting.
as
Good
opposed to a
point.
dialectical sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is, I gotta say, the further down we go, the harder it gets. Like
Yeah.
I'm getting
Yeah.
nothing out of this. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the thought. So there's thought and being, right? There's the real and the thinking.
Which is united in the idea. So this is, I think, is worth thinking about the difference between idea and the ideal. Like what's
I was
which
just about to say, like,
yeah,
so like in whatever is beautiful, reality completely determines itself, but it's not thinking. Like, it seems like an externality that determines itself from within
yeah.
to outward, instead of thinking thought and realizing thought and nothing itself.
Yeah, it means that
I don't
the
know.
object is complete within itself, whereas let's
Yeah.
say ourselves, it starts with a kind of lack, right? It starts with an incompleteness, so we're not complete.
Let's
Yeah,
I want to think about truth. So we have the ordinary truth of, does the object correspond to
right.
my Vorstellung, my imaginary representation of it. Then we have higher truth, philosophical truth, the truth we're interested in. And truth in this second higher sense also has two sides. On the one hand, what is objectively real, and on the other hand, its self-concept as such.
Mhm.
In the case of truth in the ordinary sense, the only question is whether we have hold of it. In the case of higher truth, the other to which the house or my action is to conform to is its self-concept. And the question is whether the objective reality conforms with its self-concept, whether it is what it should be. Now, I just want to have a quick little comment, and he says whether it is what it should be, and this is so interesting because it means that whether it is, it's about ontology, and what should be is about ethics
Tele-
or teleology.
or teleology.
Or teleology.
Yeah. I don't think it's
Right.
separate. I don't think it's separate. I think ethic, yeah. Like I think that's
I mean,
that's
it's like you should do this,
Mhm,
you know, like
mhm.
I should do, what should I do in life? But yeah,
Kind of
true.
That's an
breaking
Teleology is
down
different.
interesting.
the is ought distinction too, which is interesting.
Right. So
It's
let's
almost like if something, yeah, if something experiences what it is fully, it almost self determines. The ought is like a natural outpouring from a communion with the is or something like that.
yeah.
Truth occurs when a real object conforms to its self-concept. What is the self-concept?
Yeah.
Well, we're
What
the
kind
only
of
creatures that, right? Wouldn't we be the only creatures for whom this, the self concept
Interesting.
form with itself, right? Is that kind of
Yeah.
what maybe separates us in some important way? And so what creates this level of the philosophical truth or the higher truth, as he says?
I think
it's
we can look at it as what kind of troubles do they get, right? In terms of higher and ordinary truth. So in ordinary truth, as you said, the trouble you run into is basically, do we have a hold of it? And this is the same as like this is probability, right? That we talked earlier about how rationalists love talking about the probability of stuff. It's about certainty. Philosophy boils down to epistemology. How do you know? Whereas the third one, you're troubled by, and this is, I'm still thinking of self-concept basically being determinate negation. So in my view, the only trouble you run into is what are the determinate negation of the object I'm trying to analyze? How do I, in other words, how do I link it back to me? How do I, so you have what's objective, right? This is true. The world cannot but appear as as objective to you. It's before you. Then your job is, what is that to me, as opposed to what are the probability of me knowing what that is actually.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good way. It's such a weird subjective attitude
I
also
I I
to take the
I
probabilistic route, right?
I'm venting a little bit, honestly, and this becomes kind of personal, which is determinate negation. uh, how do I link this back to me? I just had a conversation yesterday with my friend, and he's like, let's just call. I think he's a rationalist. He follows literally he follows the subculture of rationalism. He likes that effective altruism, those kind of stuff.
Never
Uh,
heard of it.
yeah, it's basically, literally, here it is. Basically, you consider the probability of how do I impact the world better probabilistically? How do I help people? How do I approach things in life to make life better for everyone? Something like that, using probability, using evidence, blah, blah, and so on.
Yeah.
And he's saying, he was complaining because people are criticizing it, in various way. I don't know, he called it ad hominem attacks or something. And it's like, I don't understand why people don't like it. And it's like, I'm thinking, I don't see anything particularly wrong with effective altruism, but don't you think that this is a space where ideology can really nicely embed itself, right? Because you're not, you don't have the self-concept. Exactly, right. Where
Well,
is
also
that?
like there's tons of like what's the value structure that's sort of foundational that's then determining what is
Right,
life or what's a meaningful life or what's a
right.
valuable
Right.
How do
life.
you,
What
how
kind of
do you,
metrics
right,
are we trying to improve along, you know? So
right,
it's so, I mean, it's one way to do it, and I think it works, right? But it's like
right,
the greatest good for the greatest number of people. You then have to define what's a good life, what is good for people.
right.
Um,
Or why, and here's also like, that's a question that doesn't pop up, right? Why are you doing this in the first place? And the answer will always be something along the lines of, evolutionarily, we being good to each other is
I don't want to think about
beneficial.
it. I don't want to think about
Oh
it.
my
I don't want to think
God.
about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. And it's
That's
like,
the answer.
man, yeah. What so I just, I told him a little bit, like, maybe maybe the answer is in, yeah, I did the Zizekian thing where maybe you should just think about it.
Yeah.
Maybe you philosophize about it first.
You
And
should. I
then
think.
and then you know what he told me? Okay, can you tell
Mm.
me what the value of that is? Can you tell, like, what's the value? Like, what do I do with this philosophy? And it's like, okay,
and yeah,
then
and
there's
an
nothing. Yeah,
example.
But you have to push him out of the realm of ordinary consciousness.
I kind of
That's the
don't
only way
want
to
to.
higher truth. You have
No,
to traumatize him.
like, I've come to the I've
Come to
come to
the
the,
higher truth, man.
You have
yeah,
to make truth occur. He has to
nah,
conform his real with his object to the
I
self-concept.
Well, wait,
I
let's take this. This might
yeah.
be interesting though, because like right. So in this
I,
case,
I'm joking, by the way. Let him
no,
be.
I
No,
know.
that's
Hegel
my
says
conclusion.
those who want to be for themselves,
Yes,
let them be for
I
themselves.
agree. I agree.
Yeah.
I stop evangelizing. I stop converting people. Who cares? I salute.
Stop
I salute. Yeah.
Hegelian proselytizing, yeah.
Yeah.
But I
Go
feel
ahead.
like in this, well, in this example, right? I think Hegel at one point talks about this. You know, your friend, he wants his idea of altruism to conform, you know, to some behavior that he's acting out in the world, and you know, and he's judging that based on certain criteria that you know
Wait,
that
isn't it
he's
Yeah.
the other way
putting,
around?
huh?
He want he the representation is the altruistic value structure, and then he wants to
Yeah.
conform the object to it. Whereas he doesn't. This is actually a static
Well, but he thinks the object
thought structure.
conforms to the. He thinks the object conforms to his criterion. So he has a the crazy thing about it is that, due to the probabilistic nature of it, due to the evidence-based nature of it, they think this is airtight. Like, this is good. There's no there's no ideological, what, this is purely logic. There's no personality in this. It's a surefire way. I think, yeah, in certain troubles in life can be solved that way. Why
I mean,
not?
yeah, it is. It's all within, like I said, it's all within the realm of ordinary consciousness and ordinary
Right,
truth, and within that it works. It can work,
right,
whatever.
right. So the representation, they think that the representation of the world corresponds to, yeah, the object or the content of experience. Um, yeah, but yeah. Anyway, I mean,
Well,
it's
but
good to
what if
be.
some
Yeah.
isn't it? I said the reverse, because I thought like
Mm,
they will do actions of which their probabilistic predictions will fail, which means that they have to try again, and their action consists of making the object conform
That's
to their
exactly that.
representation.
That's how yeah.
right.
That's what I was trying to say. Yeah, exactly.
Mm. Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, is that
That's the
in
realm
this
of
case
ordinary truth.
the action is the object in this
Right.
case.
Oh, right.
That
Right.
like
Right.
the
Right.
action they you know, but then they are smuggling
Ah.
um
Yeah.
various criteria, right? On
Which
and
they don't
I mean,
think
in
about.
this case, they're
Yeah.
sort of judging the level of altruism. The level of altruism corresponds to the like you know, however they're analyzing the, you know, percentage of good they're doing, however they're
Right.
running a calculation of, oh, I'm helping
r-
33 people out of world hunger. That's better than helping 10 people out of world hunger. Therefore, I'm mathematically more altruistic or whatever.
Right.
Uh,
The reality is literally the trolley problem for them. It's
I,
crazy.
This actually reminds me of a guy in my school. He told me that if you're a good person, you have to be left wing. Otherwise, you're not a good person. I told him I'm not left wing, and he said, "But you are a good person. Why aren't you left wing? You, you." That's
That's
really
funny.
weird.
Cute.
That's very funny, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And thinking these, I mean, to me, it's, this notion of the, ordinary truth as the correspondence of representation to its object exists within space-time, right? Like within a
Right.
freeze frame, you're
There we
trying
go.
to
Yeah.
correspond your idea of something, of the apple, with this physical apple, right? But time is the thing that sort of negates that whole process. Your representation and the object itself are both going to change. And this, I think, this is how I read this notion of thinking as above space-time, or the stage of absolute knowing, where the time form is sort of absolved. It's a type of thinking that's trying to align itself with temporality, or the process of becoming, which is constantly encountering the failure of representation to conform to its object. So it's sort of a way of working with that.
Would you say that's the higher truth? That what you just laid out.
Yeah, that's I guess how I'm thinking of the higher truth is a kind of state of absolute knowing in which there is this simple self-relation, in which the time form is kind of dissolved. To me, that has it's not just conceptual, but it's also kind of experiential as well. That's how I've been reading this correspondence between thought and being. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if we're talking about like the phenomenology of absolute knowing, I don't know, like there's this objectivity, there's objective thoughts, and it seems like when we're doing logic, it's somehow related. I'm not sure actually how to think it, but we come to higher truth more closely in the idea, where the self-concept is at once reality. What is true is the idea.
And this is why it's weird, because it's like, I mean, he just, in the phenomenology, he has some interesting quotes of and descriptions of this kind of infinity as like this absolute unrest of pure self movement, this arising and passing away that does not itself arise and pass away, but it's something that does it does seem to have some sort of indeterminate quality, some sort of quality of infinity, but something that can't be really finally captured within a rigid, spatial and temporal calcified image, a freeze frame. It is the very movement of becoming in and of itself, and so it's a kind of, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's a kind of strange. It's a strange truth that, yeah.
It's also something that, like you pointed at, it's still yet restless. It is self-othering yet at home with itself in its other. And also we just read about this, right? He had some ideas about the self-othering and the other, and you see if I can get that. Jason, what do you think? Do you think there can be like phenomenology of absolute knowing?
Wow. softball questions only. Phenomenology of absolute knowing. But absolute knowing itself is already a science. So why have two sciences, right? Why have a science of like the experience of the science of knowing?
Isn't it the ground of science?
What do you mean? The absolute knowing?
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's how I think of it. I think that
Mhm.
absolute knowing is the pure self-recognition in absolute otherness, as
Right.
your own
Okay.
otherness. It's the
So and
capacity
then
to do that
so
is
and
the
then
ground of
the
science.
right. Then maybe it's the experience of science. Phenomenology of absolute knowing would be the experience
Okay.
of science, I think. But what kind of science, right? It's
Yeah,
different.
that's so funny
Yeah.
because Hegel says in the introduction, "If a science of experience." Now we
Right.
come to
It's
experience
a,
of science.
but that this becomes a tautology, right? It becomes a circular again. Yeah. So yeah, what were we talking
Because we
about
can
last?
only explicate the experience of science with the science of experience. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
I'm throwing my hands up in the air. You got me. I don't know. I mean, what the fuck? What the fuck do you want to say?
I think we're
You asked this to Terry Pinkert or whoever, not me, or Pippin or someone like that. Not good old me. Yeah. So what's the next section of this? What is it? So he's going
looking
to
at that.
he's
I feel
going
like
to
it's gonna take us.
discuss. Yep, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think he's gonna take us through in more detail through the different positions, right? The sort of
Yes.
maybe naive sort of correspondence mode of thought, and then from there, to the maybe the I don't know, in the second position, yeah. Then the Kantian
Would be
critical
Kant.
philosophy, yeah.
Yeah. And then the third, so I guess we should expect him to explain himself
And
on
then
the third one. Yeah.
third, Mr. Hegel, yeah.
I
Are
gotta
you
say though, yeah,
yeah.
go for it. Sorry.
No, go.
Yeah. No, I gotta say, like it becomes harder as you go down, but like again, I go back to the one-liners. Like he's really giving us really good stuff. Logic is the science of truth. Metaphysics is applied thinking. Like I literally took a metaphysics class years ago, and metaphysics was never explained this succinctly. Metaphysics
Yeah,
is all
right?
it's
Yeah.
always like it's always using Aristotle being like, oh, this is before, oh no, after physics or something, before physics. I think before physics. Metaphysics just meant
Yeah, some
before,
confusion.
yeah, right. But they're they're very easy concepts here in for Hegel's,
Simple.
Yeah,
simple.
metaphysics as applied thinking, like that. I'll write down some of these one-liners here. Should
Yeah,
you
these are
guys want to continue,
these are
or
great.
Yeah, I just want to here he says, thus the self-concept has hold in reality of nothing beyond what is its very own.
sometimes it
That the
just
two
feels
are
like he's just
wait,
restating the same thing in different ways, It's sort of
Yeah,
that the two are other to each other is a mere show. The self-concept intuits itself in reality. It is for itself in what is real. It is other than itself, but is at once one and the same as itself in the other. Why in the other?
is he and sorry, is he talking about, the way I interpret that is that thought and being are mere shows of the idea. So wait, I forgot my train of thought. What was the last part of the thing?
Thus the self-concept has hold in reality of nothing beyond what is its very own. That the two are other to each other is a mere show, that the self-concept intuits
Yeah.
itself. In reality, it is for itself in what is real. It is other than itself, but that is at once one and the same as itself in the other.
So I think, yeah, thought and being is to be understood like that. Like thought must coincide with, you cannot have thought without being without thought. They both appear. But their appearance, if you want to know thought, is in opposition to being. If you want to know being, is in opposition to thought. But they both are connected in what's necessary, which is the idea. What do you think of that interpretation?
I think actually that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Like one, yeah, thought appears, but the moment you want to explain thought, you need to have a conceptual link to being, and vice versa. They both appear as needing each other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that the two are other to each other is mere show.
Yeah.
So actually, in other words,
Yeah.
he's saying that he's probably using shine here, that like
Yeah,
not like the essence of it, they are the same.
right. So it's appearance, right? These are all the appearance of. So when this is also how I think about the external and the internal. They are both appearance of each other. So, yeah. And the idea is the idea is what's necessary in the
So
appearance.
then we have, okay, so actually the self-concept is kind of confusing. I think notion sounds a bit better. Well,
Yeah.
but
This is interesting because now we gonna diverge a little, because for me self-concept is a far manageable term than notion. I don't know.
I think the best is like Begriff, like the German
Right.
one. That's like,
Yeah.
because there's this in begreifen, you're trying to grasp something. It makes sense.
Begriff is an understanding that's a self-understanding or something like that. If I understand, am I wrong? What is begriff? How would you define
Well, like
begriff?
it's like you have begriff and begrijven, or begrip and begrijpen. So it's just a concept, but like I think etymology is something like you're trying to grasp something, and begrijpen or begrijven means understanding. But actually the word understanding in Hegel is verstand. It's not begrijven. If that makes sense to you. Like the
Yeah.
chapter 3 on phenomenology of spirit, it's called Verstand und Kraft, understand, force and understand. It's
In
not
English,
like a conceptual understanding.
right? In English, you can also say grasp as yeah. I think I understand. You can understand something. You can grasp it. Yeah. Okay. But
Yeah,
understand.
okay.
Yeah. So what's
Okay,
next?
thanks for watching, everyone. Please like, subscribe, and don't forget to sign up for my Patreon.
It's a shit show.
Thanks for watching. Oh, I have to stop the recording.
There we go. This is high production.
Stop the recording.